All right, Mother, I'm going to have you talk today about a lost family relic that a generational search has been conducted for and will continue until it is hopefully someday found,
If ever.
if ever. But hopefully, you can tell us and Biscuit what I'm talking about.
All right. This is the story of the Burns family Bible, and it's a sad story. Let me switch. My great great grandfather, my great great grandfather let's see, my grandfather was Albert Edward. My great grandfather was Hugh. My great great grandfather was John Burns, and John Burns was Irish, and he married a widow with 6 children. And John and Mary Boyce, who was the widow, had one child of their own, and that child was my great grandfather, Hugh Burns. Now, we know absolutely nothing about John Burns except that he was Irish and that he married Mary Boyce, a widow, in Ireland, and that they had the one child, my great grandfather, Hugh. And then at some point in time when Hugh was about 5 years old, the whole family emigrated to Glasgow in Scotland. And they were never very wealthy, but Mary Boyce's first husband, John Carr, was a British Army officer. And it is obvious from the letters that we have of Mary Boyce's and what we know about her children and the decisions that they made, it was obvious that she was an educated woman and that her children were also educated. This is in the 1850s, and at that point in time, many Irish were illiterate, but Mary and all of her children and her son Hugh were all reasonably well educated. At any rate, the whole family emigrated to Glasgow, and from there they went all sorts of different directions. They were a very adventurous family. One of Hugh Burns' sisters, Eliza Carr, went and her husband emigrated to New Zealand. They were some of the first settlers to arrive in New Zealand. Another one of his siblings, John Carr, was a missionary who went out to Trinidad and Tobago and lived out there for several years. Anyway, that's sort of beside the fact. Um, when when Hugh was about 20 or so, he decided to leave Scotland and to emigrate to England. And at that time, his father obviously gave him the Burns Family Bible. The Burns Family Bible, my mother saw it, and my name is actually the very last name that was written in it. And it was a big 2 volume family Bible. And at that time, which was common, all the births, the deaths, the marriages, the baptisms, that sort of thing, they were all written in the family Bible. So there was an ongoing record of who married who and who was born when and so forth and so on. So all of that family history of John Burns was in that big 2 volume Bible. Anyway, so John gave it to his only son, Hugh, and Hugh took it with him to England. And it's rather amazing. Um, Hugh and his wife, Selina Mensley, unfortunately um, died in the Princess Alice disaster in, I think it was 1873 or 1874. And their children, the children that were not sent out to work, the 3 younger children all wound up in in an orphanage and eventually went out and made their own way. They got a good education and good training in the orphanage, I have to say, because the Princess Alice disaster, their parents were killed in, was such an incredibly horrendous disaster that it was national news and is still one of the worst river disasters ever to occur, with tremendous loss of life. Over 650 people died. So a subscription was taken up, money was set aside, and the children of that disaster, the orphans, were given a small scholarship to help them with their education. So they were well educated. Anyway, through all that turmoil and everything, my grandfather, my grandfather, Albert Edward Burns, was able to hang on to the Burns family Bible, despite the trauma of losing parents, despite the fact that when he lost his parents when he was only 18 months old, and he was actually too young to go to the orphanage, so he was sent to live with his aunt, um, Emma Hobart, and her family until he turned 5, at which point in time they sent him off to the orphanage to join his brother and sister there. So, anyway, despite all of that and through all of that, he managed to hang on to the family Bible, and it was a very prized possession of his. As I said, mine was the very last name written in it. When I was born in 1945, my mother remembers him taking down the big 2-volume Bible from the shelf, and in his beautiful copperplate handwriting, writing my name and birth date in the Bible, and then putting it back. Unfortunately, my grandfather died a year later, and my grandmother was a very difficult woman, and she never liked her husband's family. She had no use for her husband's family, and after he passed away, she got rid of most of his possessions. I know my mother was very upset when she got rid of all of his medals and all of the things that meant a great deal to him.
Disgraceful.
Including the family Bible. And my cousin Terry, who is a great genealogist, researched, and of course very much wanted to at least see the family Bible, because it would have had all the information about the great-grandfather John in it and all of his ancestors. Because John Burns is a very common name, unfortunately, and if you look through genealogical records, there's up to 11 John Burns. So it could have been any of them. Anyway, so Terry did his best to turn up the family Bible to find out what had happened to it. They knew that my grandmother had given it away, and so he went and talked to my grandmother, and my grandmother said that she had given it to Phyllis Vickery. Phyllis was the only daughter of my grandfather's second oldest sister. Second oldest, is that right? Or was she the oldest? Hang on.
Some of the sighs and strange noises that come from this one. He's very vocal in his stretching.
Alice was the second daughter.
Alice was the second daughter?
Alice was the second daughter. And she married a man named William Day, who apparently was a very nice gentleman. My Aunt Olive thought very highly of him. Anyway, they had one child, and that was Phyllis. And whereas my aunt had been very fond of her uncle William, she had no use whatsoever for Phyllis. She felt that Phyllis was one of these people who was out for everything she could get, and she managed to get a great deal. She used to go and visit my grandmother, and according to Auntie Olive, she would take my grandmother a bottle of whiskey or something and come away with all sorts of things, including the family Bible. So when Terry heard this, because he contacted my Aunt Olive, when he heard this, he went and talked to Phyllis and said, it would mean a great deal to me if I could, at least look at the family Bible and get this information. And Phyllis denied any knowledge whatsoever of the family Bible. And so it was a dead end, because my grandmother swore that she'd given it to Phyllis. Phyllis swore that she had not. So, So that's the last that we know of the family Bible. And unfortunately, it's very sad, because that's just a whole blank. John Burns' ancestry, his history, his relatives, his ancestry, it's a complete blank. We know absolutely nothing about them. So,
what part of England was this in?
What part of England was this in? Which part?
Geographically, what area of England are we talking about?
Hampshire and the Isle of Wight. Aunt Alice lived on the Isle of Wight with her husband, and he was the lightkeeper at the Needles.
I was saying when the Bible disappeared, what?
Well, that's a good question. Probably somewhere in Hampshire. It's hard to say. Probably Bournemouth, because that's where my grandmother, she was in an assisted living facility there. And that's where it's likely that the Bible changed hands wherever it went. And it is, I have to say, even though my aunt had a very low opinion of Phyllis, and she felt that Phyllis was probably lying about not getting the Bible, my grandmother had no interest whatsoever in her husband's possessions, and she could just as easily have given it to the cleaning woman, whatever. She really put no value on it at all. So
But if one were to look for it, Hampshire or Bournemouth would be the place to start, most likely.
Terry tried very hard to find it. He went up to London and he contacted book dealers and people who would have something like that because it was, by that time it was definitely an antique. It was over 100 years old. And could have been considerably older than that. Anyway, he put the word out that he was looking for this, and if there were any leads to contact him, but nothing turned up. So we have no idea what happened to it.
So as far as you know, the last name in there is Joy Mary Zangle.
I know for certain my last name is in there.
No, as far as we know, yours is the last name in there.
Yes.
So it should say Joy Mary Zangle.
Yes.
June 18th.
June 18th, 1945.
All right.
My mother specifically remembers my grandfather taking it down and family tradition, writing his daughter's name, his granddaughter's name in the book. And of course, my mother and my aunt would be in there also.
Right. So, at the least, it's got all the John Burns genealogy information, but possibly it goes farther back than that.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it does. It's two volumes, remember.
So what could it have? What information could it have?
It would, in all likelihood, have at least John Burns' parents and his siblings, and it would have their birth dates and would have the marriage date of his parents. It also could well have his grandparents and their marriage date and their siblings. Who knows how far back it would go? I mean, we have Bibles that go back centuries, so a long time, and that's the only record frequently that people kept. And since he was Irish, and I'm sure you know the story of what happened to the Irish records, it's very, very hard to track down genealogical information on people of Irish ancestry because so many of those records were destroyed in the time of the Troubles, as they say. So, and a lot of those records, the only records that exist are records that are in Bibles or church records, and because the boundaries changed and this parish had this record and that parish had that record, very, very difficult to track that kind of stuff down.
For the sake of the audience who may not get what you're talking about, why don't you talk about why all the records were destroyed?
Because in the early 20th century, some individual felt it would be a really good idea to gather all of the census records for Ireland for the past century into one location. And that was what was done. And as I said, at the time of the Troubles, the Irish Republican Army had no use for the government, no use for government records, and they blew the building up.
That's a good story.
There are a few records that escaped. There were a few records that actually didn't make it to the repository, but they were few and far between. It's very difficult to track down Irish ancestors.
Interesting. You said all those medals were given away too? What medals
No,
were
actually, my mother retrieved the medals that my grandfather got, and Barbara has them now.
Oh. What medals did he get?
I actually have pictures of them. He was in He was in the Boer War, and he got a medal for that. I'd have to look up and tell you specifically what he was, but he he was in the Boer War, and he got a medal for that, and a medal for service in that. And he was also in World War One. He drove an ambulance in World War One, and he also served on Malta, and so he had medals for that also.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hopefully it'll turn up, Mother.
It would be great. As I said, it was Terry's fondest wish that he could find the family Bible. He really, really wanted to find it, and he did not, and he tried very hard.
I liked Terry.
Yeah, you only met him once, didn't you?
Yeah, but I liked him. I had a positive impression.
Yeah, Biscuit.
When did he pass away?
Let's see. When did he pass away? Oh, no. Let's see if we wrote that down or not.
Hopefully somebody finds it, Mother.
I hope that somebody finds it who appreciates it.
What I mean is hopefully somebody in our family finds it.
Yeah.
Is it almost his dinner? Is that why he's acting like this?
His dinner, he has an hour and 20 minutes before it's his dinner.
He's really ramping up already, though.
I know. I don't have Terry's.
All right, but was it a few years ago, or?
Oh, it was quite a few years ago. No, I think that, let's see, you were what, 10, 12 when you met Terry?
Something like that.
Yeah. And I think he died about 10 years later.
Okay, we don't have that many people left from that part.
No. Actually, I have a lot of distant cousins because, as I said, Hugh Burns' half-sisters and brothers were very adventurous. His sister Eliza went to New Zealand, and other family members emigrated to Australia, and actually two of my mother's aunts emigrated to Canada. One of them also went to Australia, and they had children. So you have cousins. You have second and third cousins in Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and like.
Are you in touch with any of them?
Not really. No.
That's too bad.
Yeah, well, they're distant cousins.
Yeah, I know.
You know.
You can put all that stuff in the Heritage album.
Most of it's in the Heritage album already.
Right.
Actually, the second volume I talk about the family Bible and the tragedy of the family Bible and like that.
All right.
So.
That's good. Thank you, Mother.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Sorry I wasn't a bit smooth.
The information got across, Mother. That's what matters.
Good. Well, you know what this is? This is, I want to go for my walk and get my biscuit.
Oh.
So, want to go for a walk and get his biscuit?
Sure.